Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Harmonious World. My name is Hilary Seabrook, and for this episode I'm joined by Nanette McGuinness from Ensemble for These Times. We'll be talking about Ensemble for These Times' fourth recording, the Guernica Project, which is out now, and it's an absolutely fascinating story. And what you're listening to right now is Nanette singing on Ultimate Betrayal, which is the first movement of Geoffrey Hoover's Guernica. I hope you enjoy listening in to our conversation.
Hi there.
Hi, Nanette.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Thank you for joining me on Harmonious World. It's a real honour to talk to you from Ensemble for These Times, and especially about the Guernica Project. So thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me and for having me to talk about it.
Please tell me about how this came about, because you at Ensemble for These Times, as a team, you commission works from modern composers. So how did the connection with the Guernica Project come about?
That's a good question. So we had been doing music of underrepresented, exiled composers from the Holocaust, composers whose voices had been stilled, and Guernica kept coming up. So our first two recordings were of poetry, Jewish women's poetry, set by my co-founder David Garner, Jewish women's poetry from the Holocaust survivors. And then the second one was Hungarian composers, three of whom did not survive, and one of whom did and came over to the US, which is how he survived. And as we were doing the research and Guernica kept coming up, it became clear that that was the next direction that we wanted to go for our projects, because we do commissioning projects and then eventually we record them. So in this case, we had a call for scores when we rebranded in 2016, and it was a huge response. We got, gosh, I think almost 300 scores from like 200 composers. We were just overwhelmed, and
Wow.
overwhelmed by the talent as well. So we ended up picking 56 scores by 54 composers and rolling out the call for scores pieces over a 3-year term. Instead of, normally you would just pick a few, do a concert and you move on, but we just were like, this isn't fair. So we did that. And several of the composers seemed relevant in the call for scores. One of them, Geoffrey Hoover, who sadly passed away a year ago unexpectedly, was also a painter as well as a composer and a musician, talented guy. And so as we were thinking through this, we chose his piece, Burning Giraffe, which is an homage to Salvador Dali's painting. And we chose that piece in the call for scores. And then we commissioned him to write Guernica, because we thought his combined sensibilities would really be a good match. And then we paired that with Mario Carro's call for scores piece, Alta Mar, which was set by setting a poet, Ernestina de Champursin, who was relevant in this period. And we also picked a piece by Mercedes Zavala, which we didn't end up using on the CD. The minutes weren't quite working out, and the recording studio time or recording hall time was running out. So we put, instead on the CD, we put a different piece by her. And she was important to the project because she actually was instrumental in bringing us over to Madrid to perform the Guernica Project, where she spoke the Conservatorio Teresa Berganza, and we also went performed at the American Space. So okay. That's the short version of how the project was conceived.
Right. How wonderful that you had so many entries, so many submissions for your commissioning project.
Yes, so we really drowned in the response. We're a tiny group, we don't have an admin. It's just us. my co-director, or now actually senior artistic advisor, and I'm now the artistic executive director. But back then we were just co-directors. And so much so that we waited until this year to do a second call for scores, which we did. And we made a very narrow window, a very narrow, it was only to be for piano, because this year is our 15th anniversary. And yeah, and our pianist emerita, who's fabulous, the pianist on this CD, is coming back and doing a piano recital of the calls for scores.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's going to be great. The pieces submitted were also very good. And despite a 2-week window, we still got over 50 submissions.
Wow.
Yeah, we chose 9. It was more manageable.
Yes. So talk to me about the piece that forms the center of this album, the Guernica 4 movement piece.
Yeah, the idea was to have a call and response to the painting. And Jeffrey knew Guernica very well, but for most of us, Picasso's Guernica is an iconic masterpiece. If you've only seen 2 or 3 pieces of modern art, this may well be one of them.
Yeah.
So Jeffrey wrote a 4-movement piece. The opening movement, he used texts from the liturgy, texts from newspaper reports, and all the 6 languages of the different people involved in the original bombing. Spanish, obviously, Latin, German for the Nazis, English for the English reporter, Basque for the people, and so forth. Then the second movement is the marketplace, because the bombing happened deliberately, it is said, when the square would be at its fullest and they could test out their bombs and do the most damage, which is just horrific. But so it happened on April 26, 1937 at, I believe, 4 p.m., late afternoon. The market was full, and Jeffrey found a poem by Walter de la Mare that talked about the marketplace and said it very evocatively, I thought. Then the third movement is really tragic. It's in Basque, the voices of the people, the children and the parents looking for each other, who can't find each other. And then the fourth movement is an arc, an arch form. So bringing back material from the other movements to kind of sum up what we've experienced. For the Basque, he actually consulted with the Basque delegation in the United States to make sure he had the words right and the translation and so forth. And I also went to the local Basque group to coach the pronunciation and make sure I got it right.
Wow.
Yeah, they were great. They were so helpful. And for the premiere of the project, they sent the Zaspiapat dancers to do an honor dance to open the program.
Oh, wow.
So wonderful.
Yeah, that's amazing. There is a musical chaos, in a good way, about all of the music, which I think resonates with the painting itself. And when I say musical chaos, I mean it's not a narrative that kind of goes easily any more than the painting does, because the painting is full of that chaos, which would have ensued following the bombing of a marketplace, of any marketplace, but certainly of Guernica itself.
In the first movement, which is kind of a snapshot of the before, I mean, in a sense, we have 3 snapshots. And in the first movement, we have all the different voices tumbling out, the chaos that you're talking about. And I think, I honestly think you're right, that Jeffrey used his painterly senses to give him an inspiration for how to do the kind of the overall for that snapshot.
The second and third movements in particular have got that
jumble.
Jumble. Yeah, I think jumble is a better word than chaos, actually.
Yeah, it's multiple voices. I mean, in the marketplace, we have all that's happening. And then at the tail end of the movement, things just peter out the way it would normally, but even more. the way it did, obviously, that day when it was like an empty, devastated spot. And then the third movement, as you say, it is a jumble of all the voices searching and not finding each other.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a good observation, actually. I hadn't thought of it in those terms, but you look at the painting all the time, so you had that honed perception.
Yes, and it's actually it's right outside the door of my office at the bottom of the stairs, as I say, and so I'm constantly aware of it. So when I was playing the music, when I first got it, I stood on at the doorway of my office looking at the painting as I was listening to it. Honestly, it was incredible, and I wish that could be the experience of people, that they could look at the painting while they're listening to the music, because it's clearly inspired by that.
Yes. Oh, thank you. That's wonderful. Wonderful that you did that. And it's true. I mean, it is hard to get rights to famous paintings, or else,
Of course,
we'd have it all, or else we'd have it all through the booklet. But you're right. Yeah. Interestingly, there's another piece on the CD that we also did, that has that multiple voices feelings. And it wasn't originally that way. The haikus by Mercedes Zavala.
Yes, well, I was going to talk to you about those, because they're fascinating little tiny pieces, aren't they?
Yes, they are. And she's a very fine composer. And originally, when we did the piece, we did it when we went to Madrid, and I read all the haikus. And then when we performed it back in the US, my cellist, the group's then cellist, wanted to do it because she had been an exchange student in Spain. And so Spanish was very close to her heart. We were like, well, of course, Yeah. But when we recorded it, I thought hard about it, and I felt my voice speaking Spanish wasn't authentic enough. And so what I wanted were different native Spanish speakers. I ended up doing from both the New World and the Old World, to have that same clamor of all the voices represented who were there. And so that's how we kind of made it even more appropriate to the project.
Yes, it fits, doesn't it? This set of haikus, this collection, just sits so well alongside the voices that you hear within the Guernica piece.
Well, the important thing, I think, in terms of history too, is here we are, where we have a major world power bombing civilians, doing horror, not for a reason that the rest of the civilized world is just going like, horrified by. And for Picasso, as you well know, he had been commissioned to paint something for the Paris Expo at the Spanish Pavilion, and he hadn't yet settled on a subject when this happened. Much of his art had been apolitical. It wasn't what he was thinking. And when this happened, his mind immediately went there, and he painted this amazing masterpiece in response.
And I think, yes, and I think, as you say, if people have only seen 2 or 3 pieces of modern art, this is probably going to be one of them.
Right, seared in their memory, because that's kind of what it's like. It was the first, it's said to have been, and I think it was the first major carpet bombing of a civilian population, and just an awful harbinger of the 20th and 21st century to come.
Absolutely. And I think it's often confused with the Second World War, because it's so close, isn't it? 1937 is so close to the start of the Second World War, and the fact that it was in Spain, and many people, particularly here in Britain, we all have experienced going to Spain on holiday. We're very familiar with Spain and the Spanish, and to try and understand something of that fairly modern history, I think is really interesting. And I'm a great believer in using the arts, whether that's visual arts or music particularly, to keep in our minds the horrors of war and the the tragedies of people involved, and I'm actually fairly confident that there will be some amazing pieces of work coming out of the Ukrainian. You can't even call it a war, because it's not a war. There's no war going on. It's just Russia doing its thing. But I'm very confident that there will be some amazing pieces of work that come out of that as well.
Yeah, I agree. I'm sure there will be. In my history textbook, and I'm sure this is the case for most American students, the Spanish Civil War gets maybe a paragraph, if you're lucky, on the way to World War II.
Yeah.
And Guernica, not at all. I don't believe I'd read about it when I was in high school, and I liked history. So it's an important thing. And Picasso actually, I believe, stipulated that the painting couldn't be housed permanently in Spain until Franco was gone and the dictatorship was gone. So it lived, I think it lived in New York for years.
Right.
It didn't go back until after Franco's death in the 80s. I think it was the 80s, but correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think it was the early 80s. Yes, as you say, sometimes that history is a little vague, but
Yeah.
I think what matters is that we can see it now.
Yeah, and with music, it speaks to us, and painting as well, art as well, viscerally, in a way that reading words on a page does not. So I'm in total agreement with you.
Yeah. Excellent.
On the Guernica Project album, there are a set of beautiful songs by David Garner, who's a very fine composer. El alma y la memoria, which is the setting Antonio Machado, another relevant poet, because he and his mom were forced to flee, and his mom perished after they fled. They had to leave his brother back. And there's also a Richicar based on the long name of Pablo Picasso. And this was my idea. I said to David Garner, I said, wouldn't this be an interesting piano piece for Dale, who is now his wife? They got married. It's very sweet. Yeah. So for Dale, who is an amazing pianist, to play, and Picasso's name is, name after name after syllable after name. So he actually didn't use the full name. He used parts of it. And then he liked the idea so much, he went on to write a set of, I think, 5 other piano pieces inspired by artists. And each one has the sensibility of that artist. So our next album will be again with Centaur. I've done, I think, all but one of my own and the group's recordings with Centaur. And it's Exiles and Emigres, or maybe we're calling it Emigres and Exiles in Hollywood, which is for us a multi-year project where we've been delving into chamber music mostly, but a few arrangements by those talented composers who fled Europe in the 1930s and 40s. They came over here. They brought their European opera, movie, film writing sensibilities, and were a major part of creating today's Hollywood sound. When you listen to John Williams, you hear the heritage. And those who didn't write for the movies taught the generation. So Arnold Schoenberg is one of those composers. Ernst Toch, these were major teachers in Southern California. So between teaching and movies, they left an incredible imprint on the world music scene.
We think of America as being a sort of a hotbed of people from all over the world. And I think Hollywood almost encapsulates that at its finest, really, although not always at its finest.
We hope at its finest. We wince when it's not, right?
Absolutely. I think that's absolutely right. But, Oh, well, that sounds very interesting.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So we started that. We did the first glimpses of it in 2017 for our 10-year anniversary. Yeah. And then because we were doing the Film Noir project, and then we wanted to expand it. And so the next year we did We toured it to the Krakow Jewish Culture Festival, and then we toured it to the Paderewski Festival in Southern California. And that we called it Dracula Rising, Ghosts of Hollywood. And then we took it to the Los Angeles Museum of the Holocaust. And then this year we were invited back to Krakow for the festival, and we focused more on Polish composers. And there are people like Rózsa, who's Hungarian, and Korngold, Austrian, and Alexander Tansman, who went to the US and then emigrated to Paris, to France.
Oh, so, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds fascinating. You definitely do some exciting projects, that's for sure.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we try to do things that will interest us, and we hope will interest other people and listeners as well. And so far, it's working rather well.
Excellent. Oh, well, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it, Nanette.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be on your podcast. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed listening to that conversation with Nanette McGuinness from Ensemble for These Times. Nanette and I were discussing the Guernica Project, and what you're listening to now is the fourth movement of Jeffrey Hoover's Guernica. I hope you continue to enjoy listening to Harmonious World. Please note I've now got a subscribers button on each episode, so if you'd like to subscribe, please just click on that. And thank you for your support in any case, whether that's financial or just listening in. And I hope you have a great week. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Harmonious World. My name is Hilary Seabrook, and it's a great delight to bring this series of discussions with musicians and composers and writers and all sorts of people to you. Obviously, there's no point in having a podcast if people aren't listening, and I'm very grateful to my listeners for doing so. Thanks also to Joe English for composing and performing this new theme tune. So wherever you get your podcast, you can leave a review. You can share this with your friends and family, either as a link or on social media and that sort of thing. I'd be really grateful for that. Don't forget that you can subscribe now. There's a link wherever you get your podcasts. So have a great week, and please remember why I started this, which is just to try and make the world a little more harmonious. Thanks for listening to Harmonious World.